In every person's life journey, there are moments of profound reflection when their perception of time and their own essence undergoes a radical shift. Around the age of 20, it seems like there is an eternity ahead, filled with limitless possibilities. However, upon reaching the age of 30, there's a realization of the finiteness of time and a desire to take control of it, to plan every moment. It's only around the age of 40 that a true understanding begins to dawn about what time truly demands of us. The great psychologist Carl Jung believed that before this age, we are merely accumulating experience and knowledge, as if the soul is diligently drawing a map of life's journey. It's only after 40 that we have enough courage to start using this map, to follow the call of our hearts. That's why Jung asserted that life only begins at 40. These are not just comforting words, but a deep understanding of the patterns of human psychological development. Before this stage, most of our decisions are made unconsciously, on autopilot. We live following behavioral patterns learned in childhood, imposed by society, culture, and family. We strive to meet expectations, prove our worth, and gain recognition. But often these goals are not truly our own. It's like rehearsing a play where we wear masks, memorize roles, and react to external stimuli. And so, without realizing it, we can spend decades passing by the true center of our existence, the self. But what happens when the masks are dropped and the roles are forgotten? Will we be able to find our true path and start living a full, conscious life? The answer to this question lies in the depths of our soul, and searching for it can be the most exciting adventure in life. The influential thinker Carl Jung defined the period of human life before adulthood as a time of forming the persona, a social mask and adaptation to social norms. This stage is characterized by strengthening the ego, but it still lacks genuine wisdom. The young ego strives for approval, recognition, and admiration, but it doesn't yet realize what wholeness is. Around the age of 40, a turning point often occurs in a person's life. This may manifest as hidden discomfort, inexplicable anxiety, or a crisis of meaning. According to Jung, this is a signal from the unconscious, a call from the self, the deepest essence of the soul. Values and aspirations that previously seemed important lose their significance. Relationships lose their former appeal. Careers cease to bring satisfaction. Beliefs weaken, and desires undergo changes. However, according to Jung, this crisis is not the end, but the beginning of a new, authentic life. This transition can be painful, and many people experiencing discomfort try to hold on to the past, avoiding self-analysis. As a result, they live the second half of their lives as a pale repetition of the first. Jung argued that life begins at 40, but only if a person has the courage to abandon the illusions of youth and go deep within themselves. It's important to ask yourself not what you want to achieve in life, but who dwells inside. This question only arises when life experience allows you to look at it with maturity and attention. Have you ever experienced this subtle inner change? That feeling when you subconsciously sense impending changes, but can't yet understand in which direction they will occur? It's quite possible that this is the call of your soul. And it doesn't matter if you're already over 40, because it's not about the numbers in your passport, but about the sincere willingness to listen to your inner voice. Life can take on a new breath right now. You just need to dare to cross the threshold that your ego is so afraid to open. And this door leads straight into the heart of your true essence. Imagine a house built in haste, without due attention to the solidity of the foundation. Over time, cracks inevitably appear on the walls. At first, they seem insignificant, but gradually the discomfort becomes more and more noticeable. This is a vivid symbol of a life lived until the age of 40. Outwardly, it's a perfectly functional structure, but it's still far from being a real home. The famous psychologist Carl Jung viewed the first half of human life as a period of active construction of the external world, career, social status, social connections, and the formation of identity. The surrounding world dictates its rules, demanding productivity, efficiency, and success from us, and our ego diligently learns to dance to this tune. However, in this dance lies one subtle but significant problem. We seem to be dancing away from ourselves, increasingly moving away from our inner center. Our persona strengthens, but the true I remains in the shadows. And the price we pay for this is a kind of inner emptiness that grows imperceptibly, like a silent shadow, relentlessly following us. Around the age of 40, this inner shadow acquires a distinct voice, manifesting as an existential crisis, where a person experiences emotional burnout and a sense of detachment from themselves and the world around them. Sometimes it announces itself through illness, a painful breakup, or the loss of a loved one. In other instances, its presence is felt as an inexplicable anxiety, the source of which is difficult to pinpoint. What unites all these manifestations? They are symbolic signals sent by the soul, urgent calls to return to one's true self. As Carl Jung stated, the midlife crisis is not a tragic collapse, but rather a long-awaited invitation. An invitation to the process of individuation, a unique path that allows a person to become who they truly are, rather than who others expected them to be. This process cannot be called easy or predictable, but it invariably leads to authenticity. It is at this stage of life that a person begins to ask themselves questions they were previously afraid to even touch upon. Who am I without the social roles I'm used to playing? What fills my life with true meaning, not just fleeting pleasure? What is dying within me, giving way to a new birth? Jung emphasized that at this turning point, many people desperately try to drown out the inner discomfort by resorting to various distractions, unrestrained consumption, or denial of the relentless passage of time. However, the famous midlife crisis is not a sign of life failure, but rather a desperate attempt by the soul to take the helm of its own life while it's not too late. If a person feels that a need for change is brewing within them, they should not ignore these signals. It may not just be fatigue, but the beginning of their true story. Before this moment, they may have been playing the role of a character in someone else's script, but now life offers them the chance to become the full-fledged author of their own narrative. And this requires silence, the ability to listen to oneself, and considerable courage. It's as if the soul is saying, "You have lived too long, focusing on external circumstances. It's time to return home to your true self." How can this turning point in life be practically achieved? First and foremost, it involves deep and sincere self-analysis, completing old business with full awareness, discovering enduring values, and most importantly, learning to live in the present moment. Not as a way to escape problems, but as a conscious dedication to one's true essence. For as Carl Jung wisely observed, the most valuable treasure of our life is hidden where we least want to look. By the age of 40, many people approach life with a whole baggage of invisible emotional wounds. These are not only the sufferings that were visible to everyone, but also those that were carefully hidden behind a mask of a smile, behind work, and a sense of duty. And it is at this moment that our inner mirror begins to reflect what we did not notice before, ourselves, without embellishment or falsehood. Carl Jung viewed this stage as the beginning of establishing a connection with the deeper layers of the unconscious. Before this period, our psyche is usually directed outwards. We acquire knowledge, build a career, interact with people, form our identity relying on generally accepted norms and ideas about what is right. However, after 40, a quiet but powerful force awakens within us, which seems to pull us inward, as if the soul itself says, "Now that you have learned to live for others, it's time to live for yourself." And this is not a manifestation of selfishness, but a vital need to find inner wholeness and harmony. Carl Jung defined the process of becoming a person as individuation. This is a unique path through which a person acquires a genuine self, uniting light and dark sides, reconciling desires and contradictions, accepting losses, and using opportunities. This process cannot happen at a young age, as it requires maturity and life experience necessary to realize that success, devoid of meaning, is just an empty sound passed off as a triumph. Therefore, when a person enters adulthood and feels that they have gone off course, this is not a manifestation of weakness. This is a sign that the ego is beginning to recede, freeing up space for the manifestation of the self, a deeper structure of the psyche. This transition requires a person's willingness to humility and unlearning old habits, which few succeed in doing. It is necessary to abandon the desire for approval, stop evaluating oneself solely on productivity, and distinguish sincere love from empty applause. This process is painful, as the former pillars of identity become cramped and do not correspond to the new essence of the person. Jung argued that enlightenment is achieved not through the visualization of bright images, but through the awareness of one's own darkness. In middle age, this darkness often manifests in the form of regrets, questionable decisions, and longing for unrealized opportunities. However, all of this is valuable material for the soul. It is from these fragments that a bridge to a new life is built. Life truly begins after 40, when the realization dawns that there is no longer time for what does not align with true values. Self-discovery becomes not just desirable, but a necessary condition for the soul's survival. This is a time of reconciliation with the past, to accept with greater kindness and understanding those whom we are yet to become. As we approach the age of 40, a question begins to pulse insistently in the depths of consciousness. What if everything achieved and created does not reflect our true essence? Carl Jung, a prominent researcher of the human psyche, noted that in middle age, many people experience something akin to a symbolic collapse. This is not due to external circumstances, but to a feeling of inner breakdown. What seemed unshakable suddenly loses its significance, and what has long been ignored begins to demand immediate attention. This period is not a tragic accident, but a natural stage of spiritual development. Paradoxically, this often happens when others consider a person successful and accomplished. For example, a successful professional suddenly feels an inexplicable inner emptiness, or stable marital relationships become burdensome, even in the absence of obvious conflicts, or a long-awaited dream finally realized seems devoid of color and meaning. Jung called this phenomenon de-identification. The ego, representing our conscious I, begins to lose its dominant position. And then the self, a deeper and more authentic instance of the psyche, begins to assert itself. However, this process is not without internal conflict. The ego desperately resists, seeking to maintain the usual order and convincing us that everything is fine, that this is only a temporary state. Therefore, many people try to suppress this inner call with distractions, travel, purchases, excessive immersion in social media, or new projects. But the stronger the desire to escape from oneself, the louder the cry of emptiness becomes. Carl Jung, an outstanding thinker, described the turning point in a person's life as crossing an invisible boundary, after which there is no turning back. A person is faced with a choice, either to accept the challenge of transformation and go deep into their inner world, or to continue playing a spectacle, imitating a life devoid of true meaning. Herein lies a profound revelation. There is no need to destroy everything that has been created before, but it is crucial to restore the lost connection with what truly has lasting value for a person. This is not about what is dictated by the expectations of others, not about what seems attractive externally, and not about what brings fleeting recognition, but about what makes the soul tremble in silent harmony. As we approach the age of 40, we begin to perceive different vibrations, more subdued, deeper, more sincere. And those who do not learn to listen to this inner voice risk getting lost in the cacophony of external demands and others' ideas. Perhaps that is why Jung considered this stage of life one of the most spiritually rich, because it is at this moment that a person stops simply existing and begins to live consciously. However, this awareness comes at a price: the courage to reject what one is not, and the silence necessary to discover within oneself the potential of who one can still become. By the age of 40, the human essence strives for a harmonious union of life experience, achievements, mistakes, triumphs, and sorrows. All of this begins to shape a new inner reality. It seems that time seeks to convey a simple truth to us: we do not start from scratch, but continue our journey from a more conscious, deep, and holistic position. Carl Jung viewed this period as a turning point between active external activity and in-depth internal self-knowledge. If before this a person was oriented towards the external world, now it is time to turn one's gaze inward. However, this is not about passive retreat, but about returning with a rich life experience. This is not nostalgia for the past, but rather an attempt to reclaim what was valuable that was forgotten under the pressure of life circumstances. How often did we have to give up something important to conform to accepted norms? How many times did we have to say yes when we wanted to shout no? How many facets of personality were sacrificed for the sake of emotional stability, material well-being, or social recognition? By the age of 40, these forgotten parts begin to make themselves heard. And if you ignore their call for a long time, they can become a source of mental suffering. Jung argued that most psychological problems in middle age arise from neglecting the needs of the soul, from an excessive focus on external factors, and from maintaining outdated beliefs out of fear of change. It is at this moment that the symbol of transformation takes on special significance. Crossing the threshold of 40 is not just growing older, it means changing the psychological paradigm, leaving the familiar ego house built from the bricks of public approval, career ambitions, and the desire for control, and setting off towards the self-house, where truth, peace, and authenticity reign. The walk through life after 40 requires accepting the inevitable passage of time and realizing that the past will not return. The body undergoes changes, relationships transform, and desires evolve. Resisting these changes is tantamount to holding on to something that has lost its relevance, like wearing clothes that have become tight and uncomfortable. Abandoning the old happens not out of pride, but out of fear of appearing naked before the world. The symbolic nakedness of middle age marks the beginning of true freedom. During this period, a person ceases to hide from themselves and begins to truly realize their essence. Carl Jung asserted that true maturity is not determined by age, but depends on the inner attitude, the willingness to discard imposed roles and sincerely strive for new discoveries. Life after 40 finds new breath, because it is at this moment that the soul feels ready to be heard. The question arises, are you listening to what has been brewing inside you for a long time? A common misconception in modern culture is the perception of 40 as a time of loss of youth, beauty, and energy. However, Carl Jung held the opposite view, believing that it is in this period that the most valuable process begins, the acquisition of consciousness. Over time, life takes on new shades. Sounds are muted, but experiences become richer. Decisions are based on mature reflection, relationships acquire special value, and time ceases to be a relentless pursuer, turning into a valuable ally. Approaching the milestone of 40, there comes an awareness that youthful haste did not lead to the expected heights, that true happiness lies not in unbridled consumption, but in sincere moments of unity with others and oneself. Freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want, but the ability to choose what really matters. Carl Jung, a perceptive explorer of the human soul, argued that until the age of 40, we are more a product of circumstances than creators of our own destiny. However, having crossed this age threshold, we acquire the ability to become parents of ourselves, which symbolizes an important turning point in life. We cease to be passive observers, toys in the hands of fate, and begin to actively shape our reality, guided not by vanity, but by an awareness of personal responsibility for our life path. However, maturity brings with it a certain paradox. As the inner core strengthens, so does the susceptibility to the outside world. The pain of others finds a deeper response in the soul. Simple things open up with a new, unexpected beauty, and silence becomes more eloquent than any words. The gaze seems to turn inward, and the inner world, previously neglected, reveals itself in all its splendor, exposing unexplored horizons and unrealized opportunities. In this regard, Carl Jung drew attention to the hidden threat lurking in nostalgia, capable of paralyzing a person. This refers to the dangerous temptation to indulge in sad memories of the past, idealizing it and believing that the best times are already behind. However, according to Jung, this is nothing more than a cunning trap set by the ego, fearing change and new challenges. The soul, on the other hand, possesses wisdom and does not succumb to such illusions. It recognizes the cyclical nature of existence and understands that each stage of life can become fertile ground for new beginnings if a person is ready to diligently and bravely cultivate this land. That is why, by the age of 40, it is extremely important to learn to take care of your inner world, like a gardener tending to their garden. It is necessary to pay attention to spirituality, to develop the ability to feel the presence of the eternal, that which remains when the noise of worldly vanity subsides. After all, it is in this silence that authentic life begins to sprout, filled with meaning and depth. Jung argued that the second half of life, lived consciously and with understanding, can surpass any youth in its value because it no longer strives for proof and self-affirmation, but only expresses what is really there. And this expression, when it is sincere and genuine, becomes the highest form of freedom. There comes a moment when a person looks back and suddenly realizes that everything they once thought was their true path was actually just preparation for the real path that is only now beginning to unfold before them in its entirety. In the works of Carl Jung, mature age appears as a turning point when the human soul craves not triumph and recognition, but the attainment of inner harmony. The desire for wholeness, for living life to the fullest, with an awareness of deep meanings and authentic goals, becomes dominant. It is often during this period that people decide on radical changes. They change their field of activity, break off relationships that have outlived their usefulness, start new endeavors, or return to the hobbies of their youth. And this is not due to sudden insanity, but to the awakening of the true self. The social mask, the persona that we wear to meet the expectations of society, gradually loses its power. The self, our true essence, comes to the fore. Jung argued that this internal process is so powerful that ignoring it can lead to serious health problems, both physical and mental. The soul, languishing under the burden of the mask, desperately demands liberation. At this moment, the ability to listen becomes vital. To listen to your true desires which were previously suppressed, to listen to the body, which sometimes says what the mind is silent about, to listen to the silence that comes only in moments of detachment from external bustle. It is in this silence that inner support is found, a place where there is no need to pretend, where we can finally be ourselves. Jung urged us to let everything that has already fulfilled its function die in order to live in accordance with this truth. However, symbolic death is frightening because we have been taught since childhood to accumulate, to hold on to the old, not to let go. Only around the age of 40 does life begin to teach us the opposite. Like a tree shedding its leaves in the autumn without the slightest resistance, we must understand that for new blossoming it is necessary to let go of what has outlived its usefulness, not because of illness, but from a deep knowledge of the cyclical nature of life. The second half of life is not a period of decline, but a time of blossoming and maturity. It is like a fruit that, after going through all the trials of the elements, finally reveals its unique, sweet taste to the world. Haven't you noticed that there is something in the eyes of people who have known life in all its fullness that young people do not yet have? It is inner harmony, born not from the absence of suffering, but from accepting it as an integral part of the life path. It is wisdom that cannot be learned from books. It can only be gained by living every moment. This is what Carl Jung considered the greatest gift of middle age, the opportunity to live consciously, to be in the world without dissolving into it, without a trace. Life truly begins after 40, for it is in this period that we begin to find ourselves. By this age, we learn to appreciate the simple joys that once seemed insignificant, the peaceful silence of dawn, a sincere conversation with someone who really listens, a leisurely prepared meal, the ability to move despite physical ailments, and time that we no longer want to waste. Carl Jung argued that in the second half of life, the soul seeks meaning, and this meaning does not lie where we are used to looking for it. It is hidden not in youthful dreams and not in achievements that once aroused the admiration of others. It lies in the invisible support that supports the visible world, in the harmony between our feelings, thoughts, and actions, in the freedom to be ourselves without constantly needing confirmation of our importance. However, this freedom requires self-sacrifice, because to live meaningfully means to let go of control, to recognize that not everything fits into the framework established by our ego, and that we will have to part with some things and people. This is not a reason for sadness, but a sign of maturity. Carl Jung interpreted this turning point as a spiritual baptism, a milestone where a person is freed from the dictates of social norms and begins to listen to the voice of their own soul. It is important to emphasize that this enlightenment is not imposed from the outside. There is no all-knowing guru, miraculous book, or all-powerful mentor who can point out this turning point. This mystery takes place in the silence of the inner world, often in solitude, which gives it special significance. It is at this moment that a person turns their gaze inward and says, "Enough, I can no longer lead an existence that is alien to me." From this turning point, everything is transformed, even if the world remains the same externally. In the depths of the soul, a restructuring takes place, the acquisition of a new center, a point of inner balance where the past and future are reconciled, allowing a person to fully experience the present. It is here that the healing process begins, not as a mechanical repair, but as a holistic integration of the personality. The rejected aspects of the self begin to find common ground, and this reconciliation doesn't make a person flawless, but grants them wholeness. By the age of 40, life's path ceases to be a competition and transforms into a fascinating journey, more conscious, rich, and authentic. Those who dare to go through this stage will discover that the most beautiful moments of life are not left in the past, but are here and now, waiting for their hour. Pay attention to the special gleam in the eyes of those who have lived life to the fullest. This is not a deceptive shine, but the radiance of people who have known the dark sides of existence, but have maintained the determination to move forward. Carl Jung argued that after 40, life ceases to be just a beautiful cover and turns into archaeological research. The goal of these excavations is not the discovery of something fundamentally new, but the rescue of what has always been present, but remained in the shadows unattended, in oblivion. This process, however, takes time and is often associated with painful experiences because each layer removed exposes a part of the truth that we are not always ready for. That is why many resist, put on a mask of well-being, fill the inner void with distractions, although deep down they realize that their existence lacks authenticity. Jung believed that illnesses, anxieties, and emotional upheavals in middle age are usually a desperate cry of the soul, demanding attention. This is not a manifestation of madness, but a voice of wisdom, striving to manifest itself. And when we finally listen to this voice, an internal restructuring begins, not in the external world, but in the depths of our consciousness, not within the framework of calendar dates, but in the space of the mind. Unwavering confidence is replaced by a sincere search for answers, categorical judgments acquire flexibility, and old grievances turn into sources of new meanings. This is how the process of maturation takes place, not through the accumulation of knowledge, but through the ability to ask deep questions. Who are you when you no longer need to prove anything? What brings you joy when no one is watching? What does your soul whisper in the silence of the world? These are the questions that life asks us after 40, not to break, but to free from the imposed and alien. According to Carl Jung, a person needs considerable courage to look at the past without self-flagellation, to look to the future without excessive anxiety, and to be in the present moment without trying to escape from it. It is in this courage that the possibility of a new start lies. Life does not begin when everything is perfect. In fact, the decisive moment comes when a person realizes that perfect readiness will never come, and despite this, chooses life in all its fullness. The question arises, is he ready for this new stage, or is he still waiting for approval from a world that could never understand his true essence? Perhaps now is the right moment, not because time has been lost, but because, for the first time, he feels genuine readiness. Approaching the age of 40 is not the completion of a certain life cycle, but rather an awakening to the most authentic period of existence. Carl Jung viewed this stage as a chance to abandon imposed patterns and finally begin to live as a unique work of art, not as a pale copy of other people's expectations, as a unique expression of the soul. It is at this moment that a person ceases to measure his life by other people's standards and begins to focus on an internal compass, more sensitive, more tuned, and more true. The charm of mature age is revealed in the realization that for the fullness of being, a person needs far fewer external attributes. Preference is given to soothing silence, not intrusive noise, conscious presence in the moment, not an endless race for illusory goals, a sincere desire for inner integrity, not futile attempts to attract the attention of others. On the threshold of the 5th decade of life, interpersonal relationships are also transformed. Superficial interaction is replaced by the need for a deep, spiritual connection in relationships based on respect for personal space, fatigue, and the need for silence, and not just on demonstrating ostentatious joy. The attitude to professional activity is also changing. Career ambitions give way to the search for true meaning and satisfaction from work. The physical body undergoes changes, but instead of fighting the inevitable aging process, wisdom comes to listen to its needs, perceiving it as a sacred temple. The soul, on the other hand, begins to manifest itself more and more clearly through dreams, intuitive insights, and fateful meetings that seem random but are actually predetermined. As Carl Jung stated, the true meaning of life begins to unfold only when a person stops running from their shadow and begins to integrate it, when they abandon the pursuit of unattainable ideals and learn to accept reality as it is. This inner integration does not make a person perfect, but it bestows wholeness upon them, and the attainment of wholeness is perhaps the most sacred experience one can have, because from that moment on, everything changes dramatically. The way one listens, loves, moves. The hustle and bustle fade into the past, giving way to depth and awareness, and it is then that true life begins, not at 40, as it may seem due to the round number, but at the moment when a person allows themselves to stop merely surviving and finally decides to live life to the fullest, with presence, courage, and soul. It is quite possible that by this point the reader has already felt a certain inner call, an urgent impulse for change. In that case, it is worth heeding this call and ceasing to waste precious time on activities that do not evoke soulful trepidation. Authentic life awaits not in the external world, but in the depths of one's own self, where all things originate. From the point of view of ordinary perception, this may be just another stage, but for the soul, it marks the beginning of a new stage of awareness. If this resonates with the reader's heart, it is worth sharing this feeling with those who also feel a need for change, even without realizing its specific direction. Sometimes it is precisely this exchange of thoughts and feelings that can ignite a spark of hope where darkness seemed to have reigned.